I'll show you how to build this professional navigation sidebar in Power Apps. It includes expandable submenus, visual indicators to show which page your users are on, a responsive design for both desktop and mobile, and role-based access for your admin users who may need access to certain navigation menu items that others don't. And this is all using the modern Power Apps controls. I'll walk you through the full build, and if you want to purchase and download the complete Power Apps file, you can find this through the Buy Me a Coffee page in the description. So let's dive right in. All right, so first thing we're gonna do is go into our app settings here, and we're gonna go into the on start property. And this is where we're gonna create a collection to store our navigation items. So to do this, we're gonna do clear collect. And then we're gonna name our collection. So COL as a prefix, and then navigation items. And then we can establish the curly braces to create a record, and we're gonna create a few items here. So it's gonna be, they're each gonna have an ID. So let's do ID 1, and they're all gonna have a title. For this one, let's do it as a dashboard. And the icon, I'm just gonna use the home icon. And screen, I'm going to just do app.activeScreen. So we're going to update this later when we create more screens to actually house all of these items, but I'm going to keep it at active screen for now. And then we're going to close off the curly brace to complete that one record. And we're going to create a few more of these. And so let's go ahead and create the second one, and let's use ID as 2. The title will be sales, and we're going to use the icon, and we're going to do document bullet list, and we're going to also have a property here that says expanded. So because we want to have submenus, we're going to establish this one as a submenu, and it's going to have a property that's called expanded. We're going to set it to false by default, but as we sort of make our selections, we'll be able to change this as needed. And we're going to also have a screen, and the screen in this case will be blank. So there actually we won't be navigating to a screen if you click this, but we will be going into a submenu, which we'll establish here as submenu. And then within this, we're going to create a table with records inside of it. And those records, they will also have an ID, and we're just going to use 2.1 as the first one. And it's going to have, again, a title. And this one, we can call this opportunities. And it's also going to have a screen that it will navigate to. And again, for now, I'm just going to say app.activeScreen. And then we're going to close off the curly brace and add a comma and create a few more of these. What I can do, I'm just going to copy these and just go paste, paste. Let's maybe have 4 submenus for this. And I'm going to change this. So this is going to be 2.2, 2.3, 2.4. And instead of opportunities, this one will be quotes. This one, I'll call it orders. And this one will be invoices. And after that, we're going to close off the square bracket. So that's establishing and closing off our table of our submenu item. And then overall, because this is all under one record, we want to close off the curly brace with that record. And to save some time, I'm just going to copy this. So I want another menu with a submenu. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to add a comma after and paste it in again. This one will be ID 3. It's going to be called inventory. I'll leave the icon as is. Expanded will still be false. It's not going to navigate to a screen. And we're just going to update some of these properties here. So again, changing all of these to 3. And then the titles of these will be products, stock levels, purchase orders, inventory reports. And I'm going to do the same thing. So really, this is totally up to you how you want to structure this. I'm just going to create this for this example. I'm just going to create a few more. So resources, I'll leave it as that. We're going to say documentation, tutorials, FAQs, and downloads. And remember just to update these IDs here. So 4. Perfect. I'm going to have one that is not a submenu. So I'm just going to copy this one right here. And we're going to make this ID 5. We're going to call this reporting. The icon will be apps list detail. And we're going to, keep it as the active screen. And then last one, I'm going to copy this submenu here. Paste that in. It's going to be ID 6. This one will be administration. The icon will be globe. We're going to keep expanded at false. It's not going to navigate to any particular screen. In the submenus, we're going to just update the numbers. And the titles here will be user management, roles and permissions, system settings, integrations. And then I'll have one more that's just an individual, no submenu. And let's call this ID 7. And we'll name this help and support. And the icon will be settings. So that's our last menu item. And we're going to just close off the final bracket, add a semicolon, and that's going to close off our collection formula. And so we can test this by right-clicking on app and then run on start. And then we can go and see our variables, and you can see and expand our collections. You can then view the table, and you can see we now have all of this data. So this is a good place for you to check and make sure you've defined everything. All your icons are what you want them to be, the expanded status, what you want it to be, and the titles and everything else. Okay, and so I guess we're now ready to move on to the component itself. So we're gonna build it within this components tab, and we're gonna just establish a new component, and let's rename this nav sidebar. We're gonna enable access app scope. It's gonna allow your variables to flow through your components into your screens. And for the size, I'm gonna set it to app.width. And height will be app.height. And so within our component, we're going to insert a container. And it's going to be a horizontal container. I'm just going to call this con nav container. We'll make its position, so x0, y0. The width will be parent.width. And height will be parent.height. We're going to border radius to 0 and drop shadow none. And so next up, within this container, I'm going to insert another container, and it's going to be a vertical container. And I'm going to title this con side panel. So this is going to be actually the panel that's going to sit to the left of our navigation. And I'm going to update some of its settings here. I'm going to remove the minimum height and say to 0. And I'm going to remove the flexible width. And I can set it to 200. I think that's what I'm going to go for as far as the width. But I want this to be changed dynamically if I want to once it's actually on some of my screens. So what I'm going to do is go back to this nav sidebar and create a custom property in order to do this. And I'm going to do a new one. And I'm going to call this sidebar width. And it's going to be type data, it's going to be input, but the data type will be a number. And I'm going to create this. And I'm going to set its default value, instead of 100, it will be 200. And I'm going to go back into my container here with the side panel. And I'm going to change the width property to nav sidebar dot sidebar width. In this, I'm going to make it white. So I'm going to update the fill and make it white. Border radius will be 0. And I'm going to actually have a drop shadow here, but I'm going to increase it to regular. So it'll give it that floating effect over top of all my screens. So now within this side panel container, I'm going to insert yet another container, and it's going to be horizontal. And I'm going to use this for my header name. So I'm going to call this con header panel. I'm going to give it a gap of 10. I'm also going to give it some padding. So on the top 10, bottom 10, left, I'm going to do 20, and right will be 10. Minimum width will be 0. And the height, the flexible height, I'm going to turn off, and I'm going to set this manually to 50. And I'm going to remove the border radius and remove the drop shadow. So now within this, I'm going to insert a text field. I'm going to rename it txt app name. We can change the actual text value. I'll just say app name for now, but you would put this to whatever it would need to be. The vertical line I'm going to set to middle. I'm going to set the alignment to stretch with a minimum height of 0. And I'm also going to turn on flexible width and set the minimum width to 0. And as far as the font size, I'm going to increase this. I'm going to make it 18. The font weight, I'll make it to semi-bold. And that should be good for now. Now within this container, I'm going to also insert a button. And I only want the icon. So I'm going to set the layout to icon only. The icon itself, I'm just going to set to dismiss, so the X. I'm going to set the alignment to stretch and then set the minimum height to 0. The width, I'm going to just manually set to 25. And I'm going to change the type to transparent. And I forgot to rename it, so I'm going to say btn close menu. So that's going to be the purpose. So we're going to have to update its onSelect property. So this is where we're going to set var is nav visible, and we're going to say false. So once we actually start putting this component into our screens, when we click this, it's going to hide this whole component. All right, so with that, our header panel is done. We can now click on con side panel, and we're going to insert a gallery. And it's going to be a blank flexible height gallery. And we're going to rename it gal main menu. In the items property, we're going to use our collection that we defined earlier in our on start property of our app. So it's called navigation items. The minimum width, I'm going to set to 0. The flexible height, I'm going to keep it on, but I'm going to also set the minimum height to 0. Template size, for now, I'm just going to set it to 200, although it doesn't really matter because it's a flexible height gallery, but I'll just keep it at 200 because it's easier to work with. Template padding, I'll keep it at 5, and I'm going to show the scroll bar. You can choose to disable it if you have like a lot of items that are going to show through here. Maybe you don't like the visual of having the scroll bar. I'll leave it on for now though. And so this is good for now. Now, the next thing, I'm going to click this edit button within our gallery, and I'm going to insert a container, and it's going to be a vertical container. And I'm going to rename this. It's going to be con menu item container. And I'm going to update its X and Y properties to 0. The width will be parent.template width. And the height will be parent.template height. And I'm going to remove the border radius and remove the drop shadow. And within this container, I'm going to insert another container. And it's going to be a horizontal container. And I'm going to rename this to con menu item button. So this is going to actually house the button of the menu item, the main one. And we're going to have a separate piece for our submenus after that, but let's just set this one up first. So the width, I'm going to set to left here, and I'm going to actually define the width to parent.width. I'm going to turn off flexible height, and I'm going to set that to just 30. And I'm going to remove the border radius and drop shadow. So now within this, we're going to insert a button. We're going to rename this btn menu item. And the text field, we're going to actually use this item dot title. So that's going to pull from our collection. And for the button, the icon, we're also going to define this as this item dot icon. The alignment, I'm going to set to left align. And the alignment in the container, I'm going to set it to stretch with a minimum height of 0. And I'm going to change the type to transparent. And for the width, I'm also going to set it to flexible width on and minimum width of 0. Now, of course, this button, we want it to do something. So we're going to go into the advanced on select property, and we're going to write out a little formula here. So if not is blank this item dot submenu. So in other words, if this item has a submenu, then we're going to use a patch function, and we're going to patch back to our collection of our navigation items for this item. And we're going to update the record for expanded to whatever it's not. So not with the exclamation point, this item dot expanded. And we're going to close the curly brace and close the patch function. Otherwise, we're going to set var selected menu ID to this item dot ID. We're going to close that function. We're going to do a semicolon so that we can also set another variable, which is var isNavVisible to false. Another semicolon, and we're also going to navigate to this item dot screen, comma, and we're going to use a phase transition. Add a semicolon, and then at the very end, we're just going to close this if statement. And now that we've defined this, we also want to go into our icon style. So by default right now it's just outline, but we want to actually add a condition. So when we have one of our items selected, it's actually the filled version of the icon and not the outline version. If this item dot ID equals var selected menu ID, or, and then within a bracket here, I'm going to do a count rows, and I'm going to filter my this item dot submenu where ID equals var selected menu ID. Close the bracket, close the bracket. If that is greater than 0 and not this item dot expanded, then I want to be filled. Otherwise, outline. And then close the function. So at its core, what this function is doing is making sure that when we select one of the menu items that the icon gets filled in, but it's also doing something where if we have a submenu selected and the main sort of menu is collapsed, it's also going to highlight that particular icon so that we know that, hey, you've selected something as a submenu, but it's not currently visible on your navigation menu. So we're giving you a hint that it's under one of the navigation menus. So that's what this is doing. So the next thing we want to do is add a little chevron here. So a little arrow to point up or down, depending on if one of the navigation menus is collapsed or expanded, or hide it if the particular menu doesn't have a collapsible submenu. So we're going to go ahead and insert another button, and we're going to rename this btn expand collapse. And the key functionality here for the icon, we're going to change this. So if this item dot expanded, so if that equals true, then I want the chevron up icon. Otherwise, I want the chevron down icon. And I also want the layout to be icon only. And I also want to have its visible property. So it's only visible if not is blank this item dot submenu. So if this item has a submenu, I want this to be visible. And the align, I'm going to keep it at middle here. Vertical align also in the middle. The height I'm going to set to stretch with a minimum height of 0. And then the width, I'm going to set it manually just to 25. So it sits right on the edge there. And then the type, I'm going to set it to transparent. And for its onSelect property, all we're really going to do is a patch function. And again, to our collection, similar to what we did before, it's going to be this item. And we're going to update the expanded property to not this item dot expanded. So whatever it's not, it's going to be set to the opposite. So next what we want to do is add another submenu here, and it's going to be under the menu item container. So we're going to go ahead and insert another gallery, blank flexible height gallery. And we're going to rename this to gal submenu. In the items property, we're going to set it to this item dot submenu. And I'm going to set its visible property to this item dot expanded. So it's only going to be visible if the expanded for this item is true. Minimum width, I'm going to set to 0. And because we want a variable height, there could be 1 or 2 items under a particular section. There could be like 5, 10, however many you have. So what we want to do for the height is actually turn off flexible height. And we're going to set it into a formula where it's going to look at self. So itself is the gallery dot all items count times self dot template height. So based on whatever the template height is and how many items there are in that particular gallery, it's going to adjust its height accordingly. And the template size, I'm going to set it to 30, and the template padding, I'm going to set to 0. For the show scroll bar, it doesn't really matter if it's on or off. I'll just turn it off, but technically it doesn't really matter because it's always going to be exactly the height that it needs to be depending on the number of items you have in your submenu. And one thing that's actually good to do for your galleries, both the main menu and the submenu, if you go to advanced and you look at the loading spinner.data, you could just turn that to none. And you can also turn off delay item loading. So you can turn that to false. So I'll do the same for the main menu as well. And so right now we can't actually insert anything in the gallery because it's not visible. You need to hit that little edit icon that's usually available on the gallery. So for the visible property, I'm just temporarily going to set it equal to true. And I'm just going to comment out the actual code that we'll have once it's fully done. And so now we can click the edit button and go ahead and insert a container. And it's going to be a horizontal container. And we can call this con submenu item button. And I'm going to set its x to 0, y to 0. Width will be parent.template width. Height, I'm going to manually just set to 30. I'm going to do a left padding of 23. You'll see why in a second. I'm going to have a little line that sort of follows each sub-item, and this is just how it works with the alignment. And the border radius, I'm going to set to 0 and drop shadow to none. And I'm going to go ahead and insert a container, just a regular container. And this is the line that I was just talking about here. So we're going to turn off flexible width. Height, minimum height will be 0. And I'm going to make that width to 2 pixels. So it's going to be a very thin line. I'm going to have 0 border radius, 0 drop shadow. But the color, I'm going to have a custom color. So I want, if one of the sub items is selected, I want it to be my primary color. Otherwise, I'm going to just pick a lighter gray color. So if this item .id equals var selected menu ID, then I want app.theme.colors.primary. And otherwise, I want color fade of color.light gray and just fade it by 40%. So you can hard code this, you can pick whatever colors you want, but This is essentially what I've gone ahead with. And I'm going to call this con submenu indicator. And we go back to the submenu item button container, and we're going to insert a button. And I'm going to rename this to btn submenu item. The text value is going to be this item dot title. The layout is going to be text only. I'm going to left align the text. The vertical alignment will be in the middle. I'm going to have it stretch with a minimum height of 0. Flexible width will be on as well with a minimum width of 0. And I'm going to have a type of transparent. In the font color, I'm going to have a custom color here to highlight which one is selected if it is selected. So if this item.id equals var selected menu ID, then I want app.theme.colors.primary, otherwise color.gray. And for its onSelect property, of course, we do want it to have a function. So we're going to set var selected menu ID to this item.id. And I also want to set var is nav visible to false. And I also want to navigate to this item.screen. And I want a fade transition. And we'll close that off. Now you can see there's still a lot of space in between. I actually haven't set the height of each of these items accordingly. So there's a little trick that we're going to use. And it's going to be by adding a spacer underneath my menu item container. So I'm going to insert another container, just a regular one at the very bottom. I'm going to name this con menu item spacer. And I'm going to set the minimum width to 0. The flexible height I'm going to turn off and change it to 1 with the height. And border radius 0, drop shadow none. And then so now what I can do is go back to my main, like the main container and update its height property. So right now it's just parent.template.height. But what I want to do is set it to the con menu item spacer dot y. So now if we hold the Option or Alt key on our keyboard, we can see everything is expanded properly. And I can click these buttons, and of course it's not working, and that's because we have to go back to our submenu and update the temporary value for visible that we added and just keep it at this item.expanded. So now when you hold the Option or Alt key, you can then see, if you click through, you'll be able to expand some of these items, or multiple at the same time. Now I also want to add a footer here, so just with the user's name and maybe their picture. So what I'm going to do is go to our side panel, so the main container for side panel, and I'm going to insert a little divider. So I'm going to insert a container, regular container, and I'm going to call this con divider. And minimum width I'll set to 0. Flexible height I'm going to turn off and change to 1. The border radius will be 0 with drop shadow none. And the color, I'm just going to change it to a very light gray. So that's going to sit right there. And we can't really tell what it's doing until we add our actual footer container. So we're also going to insert inside of us our side panel container. We're going to insert another container, which is going to be horizontal. We're going to rename this to con footer panel. And I'm going to give a gap of 10. The padding, I'm going to do 10, 10, 20 on the left side and 10 on the right. Minimum width will be 0. The height, I'm going to turn flexible height off and I'm going to set it to 50. And border radius 0 and drop shadow none. So now when I just hold the Option key or Alt key, you can see there's a slight line. You can actually see the divider. So it just creates a nice separation for the footer. And then within this footer container, I'm going to insert an image. I'm going to name this IMG user photo. The image will be user open bracket, close bracket, dot image. The display mode, I'm going to set it to view, so it's not clickable. The height, I'm going to set to 30. Width, I'm also going to set to 30. I'll align it in the container in the center there, although it doesn't really matter. Border radius, I'm going to set to 15, which is half of the width of the square. So that's always going to create a round image. You can't really tell because it's on a white background, but it is becoming a circle. And then that should be good for the image. And then I also want to insert a text label for the name of the user. So we're going to say txt username. The text will be user, open bracket, close bracket, full name. The vertical align, I'm going to go to the middle. I'm going to set the alignment to stretch with a minimum height of 0. Flexible width, I'm going to turn on with a minimum width of 0. I'm going to reduce the font size just to make it a little bit smaller. I'll just go to like a 12. And that's looking pretty good. Once you overlay this whole thing on top of your screens, I want the users, if they click away from the menu, I want this to close the menu first, right? So I don't want this to be always expanded. So if they click anywhere here, it's just going to close the menu automatically. So the way we do this is we go into our container of the nav container, and we're going to insert here a button, and it's going to basically take up the whole space after the navigation menu. And I'm going to say btn close menu 2, because we already have a close menu button here. So it's going to be the second one. There's not going to be an icon, so it's going to be text only. But the text itself, I'm going to delete. The type will be transparent. And we're going to have to update the width and height. So I'm going to set it to stretch with a minimum height of 0. Flexible width as well is going to turn on with a minimum width of 0 as well. And its onSelect property, what it's going to be doing is just hiding our navigation. So it's going to set the var isNavVisible variable to false. There we go. So now it's a clickable area. And if they click here, it's going to close the menu. Okay, and don't forget to click save throughout. You don't want to lose the progress. So there you go. So I think that's looking pretty good. What I'm going to do now is actually implement it into my screens and show you how that's going to work. And we can create some pages. Okay, so for my first screen, I'm just going to set things up. I'm going to insert a button. So depending on how your app is set up, I'm just going to have a little button here. The main purpose of this, I'm going to make it icon only. And I'm going to use the grid dots. And its onSelect property is just going to be a simple set var isNavVisible to true. So however you implement this in your app, totally up to you, but I'm just going to say that this button is going to activate my navigation menu. And this will just be btn open navigation. And so now that we have that, I'm going to insert, and then under the custom, we can now insert our component that we created. So nav sidebar. There we go. It takes the screen of my application. So if it is responsive, so right now it's just a Canvas app, but I'll show you what it looks like when in a responsive setting as well. So we can just do a quick test. It's interesting though, it's turning a black color. What I do want it actually is to be this blue of the primary app. So I'm going to go back to our component and just check out our gallery here for our main button. So I'm going to use the similar formula that we use for our icon style, whether it's filled or outlined. And I'm going to implement that for the color, for the font color. But I'm just going to change a few things. Of course, we're not going to use filled and outlined. We're going to put some colors in here. So I'm going to use app.theme.colors.primary. Otherwise, it's going to be a color fade of color.black times 30%. So it's just going to create that slightly off black color. There we go. So now you can see if we preview the app, we can expand, we can select something. It's going to automatically highlight the color. If we were to collapse this sales tab, you can see now it highlights it and it shows you that you've selected something underneath this menu. There we go. To make it truly responsive, you might want to implement something for a mobile setting. So if you go into settings and for display, if you turn off scale to fit, it's going to make it fully responsive. So it'll sort of play around with mobile, let's say iPhone 8. You can see for a mobile version, I don't want it to actually show up just halfway. If it's a phone, I want it to go all the way to the end of the screen. So what you can do, once you've added it to your screen, you just need to change the width property to something like if app.activeScreen.size is greater than 1, then I want it to be the 200 that we typically have. Otherwise, I want it to be app.width. Now, the other thing you want to do is update its visible property. So it responds to when we change that variable, right? So it's going to be is navbar visible. And now if we preview this, we can play and you can see if we click away here, it's going to hide it. If we click the X button, it's also going to hide it. And also if we click on one of these, it's going to hide it as it navigates to a different page. Now, what you might want to do for a mobile version is when it's visible, you might not want this blank space. You might want it to be fully sort of expanded to the edge because there's not that much space anyways. So what you might want to do is update this sidebar with custom property. So by default, it's 200. You can manually change it to like 400 if you want, depending on how wide you want this to be. But you can also make it something variable. So if it's a mobile size, what you can do is if app.activeScreen.size is greater than 1, then you can set it to 200. Otherwise, I want it to be app.width and close that. So now, just to explain that a little more on the app, there's certain breaking points. There's size breakpoints, 600 pixels, 900 pixels, 1200 pixels. So anything that resembles 1 is going to be 600 pixels. So that formula that we did, if the pixels are greater than 600, then it's going to be that 200 width. Otherwise, it's going to be the size of the app. So if we now play this, you can see it goes all the way to the edge. And that's much nicer looking from a mobile experience. And if we change this to the window size, it's going to just default back to the 200 pixels that we had. Now, some questions that have come up with my previous navigation menus is how can we integrate like an administration piece? So if someone's an administrator, how can they have access to only certain types of menu items? So maybe you want to hide this administration menu along with its submenus to be only accessible to certain users. So we can set this up. It's not super difficult, but what you have to do is on the app start. So we're going to go to on start property. You're going to have some sort of variable and some sort of way to identify who your administrators are. So for simplicity, I'm just going to set my variable var is admin user to true. But of course, your logic might be something different, right? You're going to want to actually say if the user's email is in this category, or there's a few different strategies to use to identify who's an admin, but I'm just going to do a simple one, just set it to true and then false and toggle between the two so I can use it for this demo. So again, anytime you make changes to the onStart, you want to run onStart. And by default, nothing is set to admin yet. So what we want to do in addition to setting this admin user is update our collection. So let's say you want the administration section to be only accessible to administrators. So after maybe the screen, we can just say admin and set this to true. Add the comma to complete it. So this is now basically saying that, only administrators have access to this tab. Well, what you can do, and let's just run this. By default, nothing's happened yet. So what we need to do is actually go into our component and in our galleries menu, and our items property. Right now, we're just filtering for all collection items, right? So all our menus. Well, now that we have this admin section here, this one is the only one that's set to true. So we need to add a filter here to check if the user is an admin user. So if var is admin user, then I want our collection, right? So all of our items. So assuming that they can access everything that's on there. Otherwise, I want to add a filter to my collection, and I only want to filter where admin is blank. So is blank admin, and then close off the brackets. And then now if I go to my screens and I just run on start, by default, my user is true as an admin, so I'm going to see everything. But the moment I set it to false, and then I run on start, you can see that that section gets removed. So then now I can only access the ones that don't have the admin condition. And I can go back to true so that I can see all items and then run on start. And there it's back. And now to actually make it functional, right? So right now we're kind of just clicking through. It's not actually going anywhere. What you'll want to do is probably just duplicate the screen or add it to your various screens that you have. I'm just going to go ahead and create some of these screens. I'm going to use SCR, and then I'm just going to say 1. So this is screen 1. If I'm going to keep everything the same, I'm just going to duplicate this a few times. And I'm just going to go based off of the names and submenus as well. So SCR1 can be just dashboard. SCR2, it's going to be under sales. So it's going to be sales opportunities. This one will be SCR sales quotes, SCR sales orders, SCR sales invoices, and then we're going to go into the inventory piece. So it's going to be SCR inventory products. Okay, so I fast forwarded a little bit and I just created all of the screens and then for the submenus and everything. So now I'm just going to go back to the home. And what you also need to do is go into the app, and on the on start, we're going to have to update all of these screens here. So dashboard is going to be SCR dashboard. Opportunities, it's going to be sales opportunities, and so on. So I'll fast forward through this as well. Okay, so there we go. Now all of our screens are linked. I'm just going to run on start, and I'm going to select the dashboard. And so let's see how that goes. So we go opportunities. It's going to take us to the opportunities page. There we go. Well, actually, let's see it in this view so you can see that it is actually moving us over to it. There we go. So yeah, it's navigating us through all of them. Tutorials, there we are. Reporting. Perfect. And another thing that you might want to do on the on start property is just set the default sort of selected menu item. So we're going to go do a set selected menu ID to 1. Right, so by default, right, so right now nothing is selected, but if we go run on start, by default, because dashboard is going to be our home screen, it's always going to be the first one selected. And if you want to change the color, so this is using the sort of the theme of your app, so you could go to themes and select something like this one, the orange, green, whatever it is, it's going to take after that. And there we go. And another thing actually that you can do to streamline your OnStart is using the formulas bar on your app. You can say nav sidebar width equaling this, and then so this nav sidebar width, you can actually go into your components, and under the sidebar width property, you can set that to that particular number. And so anytime that you change anything, it's going to all be applied consistently. So yeah, making sure you apply that to all of them. So now when you go in here and if you want to change this to 250, let's say in the formula, it's going to change them on all your screens. I'm going to change it back to 200. And there you have it, a fully functional navigation system with expandable submenus, which is going to transform the way your users interact with your app. And remember, you can purchase the complete file through the Buy Me a Coffee page in the description. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.